That little roll of tissue or bark around it is called the branch collar. We don't ever want to cut the branch collar off. We want to cut just beyond the branch collar. In most cases, that's going to be somewhere between 1/8 and 1/2 of an inch out from the trunk. But if we cut further back than that, it takes a long time for that wound to heal over. If we cut right at the branch collar, then it will grow over, and when you leave, look at some of these cypress trees we planted 20 years ago when we're this size. Or look at this Mexican sycamore that's right out here. If you start down at the ground level, you probably can't even tell where the early limbs were on that tree. When you look at this height, you will see where that tissue is overgrowing the cuts where we took the limbs all the way off. If you look further up, you'll see a cut where the growth is just barely beginning to grow over it. Now, don't cut it off this far out from the trunk when you get ready to take that limb all the way off. Because what has happened, will happen, is now that that trunk is nice and shady, where you cut it, that little stub is just going to die. And all you've got is dead wood. It eventually is going to rot away, but it's going to leave sort of a channel back into the heart of the tree, which, can always be a place that you can get rot into a tree. The central core of all the kinds of trees that we grow in this part of the world, except palm trees, is nothing but dead tissue. They're called xylem, is what the tissue is called. The cells are called xylem cells. They have no nuclei. They are not alive. They are still important to the tree as far as storing water and translocating water, but that's why you can have a very, very healthy tree that's totally hollow on the inside. Is that dead tissue has just gotten some rot in it, and those xylem cells have just rotted away, and that wood has rotted away. The tree's still nice and healthy because all the living part of the tree is just underneath the bark. The cambium and the phloem layer are live cells. Is that tree healthy? Sure, that tree's healthy. Is that tree strong? No. If we get a real big windstorm, that's the tree that's going to break and fall over. Now, just a couple of, so that's how you handle young trees. Leave the trashy trunk until, they get up to a decent size and cut those limbs all the way off. Now, in general, in pruning in trees, the same thing's true to some extent in shrubs, but trees are really a special case. And the limbs may come out either at a very narrow angle to the trunk, or they may come out at a very wide angle to the trunk. The wider the angle a limb makes, the stronger it is. The narrower the angle that makes, you've got wood fibers that are running parallel to each other. You've got bark building up between the trunk and the limb. The narrower the angle is, the weaker it is. I can take a tree, with a limb this big around, growing at a very narrow angle, and I can probably split that tree in half. If I can do that at this stage, that tree may grow a little bit bigger, and Mother Nature will split that tree in half with an ice storm or windstorm or something else. That limb that is coming straighter out, I'll climb a tree and I'll step on a limb that's this size and know that it's going to support me just fine because it's such a strong limb. But if I stepped on that smaller limb at a narrow angle, man, it'd break away from the trunk in an instant and I'd be on the ground. So when you have a choice on young trees, prune out all of the narrow angled limbs. And if you feel like you need to take one limb out of two off of a tree, always leave the wider angle because that's going to make by far the stronger trunk. If you have a tree that grows up that's decided to make two trunks, cut one of them out. The pecan tree, when you walk outside, you'll see a pecan tree is about this big around, right outside the seminar area here. When we bought the property 20 years ago, I guess, for this piece of property, that tree had two trunks. It was a double trunk tree that split at ground level, and each trunk was about this big around. And we knew that if we left that, someday we'd get a windstorm that would probably break that tree in half. So we cut one of those trunks completely out. The other trunk straightened. It's almost totally upright now, and it's an extremely strong, good pecan tree. But if you have a tree with a double trunk, a young tree, always take one of them out. If you have a tree that's already very large and has a double trunk or has gone up and made, a very close angle fork, well, you've got a choice. You can cut it out, which may leave your tree looking one-sided. What an arborist would do if he said, okay, I don't want to cut either of those limbs out, what am I going to do? If it's two trunks that are fairly close together, an arborist would go, say, 4 feet up above that point, and he would drill a hole all the way through the two trunks. He would take a piece of what we call all thread, which is just like a, threaded bolt, but it's just all threads, put a washer and a nut on either end, and put it through those trees and hold it together so that it's not able to physically split open and break. The other option would be to do what we call cabling, and that is going through and in effect tying the major limbs of that tree together further up so that they couldn't flop out and split and break the tree. But go home and look at the trees in your yard. If you see a lot of narrow angle limbs, which are especially common in elms, or if you've got a tree with a double trunk, you can think about calling a good arborist. Ed Edder's the only guy I recommend. But calling a good arborist and being proactive, or you can wait until that tree falls on your car or your house or you, and then figure out what to do about it. You've got the choice on a young tree, though. I try to do it when we get trees in here, and we got some in this week that I haven't had a chance to look at. But I try to go through and cut out those narrow angles before they have a chance to develop into major limbs. So trees are sort of a special case when it comes to pruning. Thank you for coming. Let's see, other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is there an optimal angle?
45 degrees or more. The closer it approaches 90 degrees, the better. 90 degrees being a right angle, 45 being here, 20 being up here. I would always try to remove an angle that's less than 45. Yes, sir.
Are we going to talk about root systems?
We can.
Well, trees. The reason I'm asking, we've got 2 fruit trees, lime and Meyer lemon, that are in pots, and the pots are about as big as I can afford to move them. Should I be repotting or trimming the root system and potting them again?
That's a good question. A plant has a balance between the amount of roots it has and the amount of top that it has. Thank you. I understand that people have things to do. You're not offending me if you have to get up and run off, but and I'll stay and answer questions as long as you like. But the question, a tree has a balance between a top and a root system. You simply can't let the top get any bigger, or you'll be watering it 4 times a day. So you can reduce the size of the root system, and in effect what you're doing is stunting the tree. There's a special name for that. It's called bonsai, and it's been practiced for, you know, thousands of years. And these old bonsais, it's a tradition that started in the Orient. And what they're doing is trimming the top of the trees and then trimming the roots of the trees to compensate, to bring them into balance. So it's a lot of work, but yeah, if you can't let those trees get any bigger, tip the pot over, pull the thing out of the pot, and thin out the root system. That's the only way you will stunt that tree and keep it small. Yes, ma'am.
Japanese ligustrum. It's a mess. It does have the double trunk. And then, you know, when the branches come off, they just
Yeah, shoot straight up.
Yeah. You pointed yours out. It's a beautiful tree. Yeah, so.
Cut it back to the point you want it to branch.
Just those long
Again,
ones.
if someone had started when that Jap ligustrum was this tall, you'd have 15 trunks coming up and it would be very full. Nobody did that. And so now if you want to make it more heavily branched, you're going to have to cut it down to the point that you want it to branch out.
I'd like for it to look like a tree. Tree.
Just it's all in how you prune it. They took one out of an uncle's yard years ago. The trunk on that Japanese ligustrum was like this big around, and it literally was a tree. Yes, ma'am.
What about mountain laurel in the ground, about 3 years old, but you know, not? Should you ever trim that?
It's up to you. It's up to you. Remember that the more light a plant gets, the bushier it can become. In lower light, you can cut it back and it's not going to bush out. It's always going to be thin. I mean, if that plant has one stem coming up and it's really shady and you cut it back, thanks for coming, guys, it's going to put on one more stem. That's why, you know, 35 years ago when somebody's home was built, they planted boxwood in front of it and planted an oak tree in the front yard, and it was beautiful. Now that oak tree has gotten so big and tall that the boxwood is thin and ugly. It's not the boxwood's fault. It's that tree is shading it so much. And you can cut it back till you're blue in the face and it's still going to be thin and ugly. It's time to either cut down the oak, which nobody wants to do, or replace the boxwood with something that grows better in the shade. Yes, ma'am.
Yep.
Back when you were talking about the height, I have a Yukon holly that I need to keep at about 7 feet. And so I understand that going back and cutting off the mixed growth, but as far as like keeping the height, or just cutting off the top, or?
Again, you want to try to avoid just picking a random point to cut on a major limb. If you have a major limb you need to cut back, come down to one that's a branch that's already coming off at an angle you can accept and cut just above that point.
And then a totally unrelated to the Yukon holly. I have a cedar elm that